down to business.
When he drinks, he thinks.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the #1 liquid-fueled, liquid-lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings Broadcast. And yes, I'm a little more somber tonight, rather than being the hyperactive, typical host, because of the fact that tomorrow is the anniversary of the most horrific terrorist attack that occurred on our soil. Of course, I'm talking about 9/11. I want to put together, or I have put together, a little bit of a tribute, and you'll notice that my background will actually start changing every so often here, and give different images of a memorial type status, sort of like this. Yeah, sort of like this one is right now, but it'll be different ones and it'll rotate. I've got about 13 of them, 13 or 14, and it'll rotate as we go through the show. So I also have skipped September 10th's American Patriots Almanac entry in favor of tomorrow's entry for September 11th. But before I get to that, I also want to let you know that I have some other things too. I mean, after this brief tribute to the September 11th heroes who died protecting people, trying to get them out of those towers, taking down a hijacked plane in Pennsylvania, and unfortunately helping the people through the destruction at the Pentagon as well. I also have a few other things on the back burner here to sort of tie it together with some things that happened on September 11th or happened shortly after September 11th with regards to some of our laws. And I also have a interesting question for whiskey later on with regards to veterans and yeah. So I'll get to that in just a moment. But first I want to say thank you for coming and joining in the broadcast tonight. I do appreciate that. It looks like I have roughly 13 watching on Rumble, and I know I have at least one. I know I have at least one on Facebook. Not quite sure about. Yeah, it looks like it's just the one on Facebook. Nobody's watching on YouTube. That's all right. Whatever. Okay. So first things first, I want to tell you a little bit about my particular day, on that day and how it started out. My wife and I my wife was pregnant with our first, born, and he was only a couple of weeks away. My wife was actually on bed rest at the time. And we had woken up that morning. I was getting up and getting showered and everything else. And I came out of the shower, right after I had woken up. My wife had, seen the news announcement on her, or something. I don't know how we got on it, but she, looks like I've got somebody on YouTube. Thank you, Noah. I appreciate that. So I gotten up because obviously I live on the West Coast. So I was, 3 hours behind, and I had gotten up and my wife was watching something on TV about it. And she had said, oh my gosh, there was a plane that hit one of the Twin Towers. And I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just a horrific accident or whatever. And I went in to shower, going through my normal routine to get ready. And when I came out of the shower, I was standing there watching the news footage, and I caught the live feed of the second plane hitting the second tower. And after that had happened, I looked at my wife and I literally said to her, I was like, America is under attack. After that, it's sort of, the rest of the day was kind of a blur. I went to work and I was physically at work, but mentally, I don't think anybody was really paying attention to what was going on. To be honest with you, I don't think anybody could. And, we sat glued. We brought in televisions. We turned on televisions in the break room and stuff. And a lot of people went in and sat glued to the television. And just the horrific scenes. And unfortunately, one of my coworkers at the time had an uncle that worked maintenance in the Twin Towers. And he had unfortunately been trapped on the upper floors. My coworker had found out that he called his wife, her aunt, and had basically said, "I don't think I'm going to make it out of this," and basically said his goodbyes. Obviously it was horrific to watch the towers come down. And there's still, even to this day, a lot of conspiracy theories talking about how there's no way that a plane could actually do that. Especially not the way that it came down. I'm not even going to get into those. I'm not a structural engineer. I can't even tell you, but I can't even tell you the science behind it. But I am going to tell you that as far as I'm concerned, it really doesn't matter how the things came down. 3,000 plus people, or roughly 3,000 people, didn't come back. They went into work, normal day, and didn't come back. And it's a horrific thing, regardless of what you may think or how things worked out or whatever. There are some sad pieces about this event. One of them is, and while doing a little research for tonight's topics, I found an article that talked about how 21 years later, we still don't have the planners of that event. And to be completely honest, it's things like that and the Las Vegas, Mandalay Bay shooting and stuff like that. The longer that they go on, the more mysterious and more conspiracy theories come out about it. So it's really tough to, try and even defend or talk about how, oh my gosh, people died, and, whether it was internal, whether it was external, whatever, just the fact that those people left for work, normal day, just like mine, and forever had been changed. Last year, when I did this episode, I basically said that I wanted my America that was there on 9/12 to come back. And I still do, because this horrific event brought together everyone throughout the entire world. It wasn't just Americans that had gotten hit. The World Trade Center was a mecca of international banking. And there were a lot of other people who weren't necessarily Americans who also died that day. It was a horrific attack on what essentially was a symbol of American financial freedom. The World Trade Center had been bombed earlier, or an attempted bombing earlier, and reports started coming out about a FBI agent who had taken one of the bombers that they had caught after they tried to blow up the building from the basement. And don't know if this is true or not. Could be just a story. But apparently, as they were being airlifted out of the city, the agent looked at one of the perpetrators and basically said, "See, you didn't do it. They're still standing." And that event is rumored to be the reason as to why why Al-Qaeda continued to attack, or whoever it was, continued to attack and try to take down the towers. They were symbols of freedom and independence. And it's just amazing that we, even had something like that happen. And of course, the aftermath of that, whenever you experience something like that, the aftermath of something like that happening tends to, make people feel less safe. And so your obvious knee-jerk reaction is to implement safety mechanisms to try and prevent it from happening again. One of those being the Patriot Act. And I've got an article on that coming up. But before I do any of this, before I continue on any of this stuff, we need to pay tribute to the people who lost their lives, the firefighters who went unflinchingly into the building under seemingly impossible odds while watching and hearing and seeing people essentially jump to their deaths because they had no choice. They either were going to get burned alive by the heat of the flames, or they were going to die by smacking into the sidewalk. And it's hard to hear those things, but I did listen to some of that, and it's really strange and surreal when you listen to some of that audio. As you're listening to it, you understand and you know what the sounds are, but there's still a bit of a detachment because it's not like clear. The sound isn't like anything you would think about. You also have, the heroes on the plane, and I'll read to you. They highlight a little bit of it in the American Patriots Almanac, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But I'll read to you about everyday Americans or people on a plane who decided to take matters into their own hands and possibly prevent another large building or large mass casualty attack. And then there's also the people at the Pentagon. Now, reportedly, that plane that hit the Pentagon was actually aimed for the White House. But unbeknownst to anyone who may be taking a look overhead, the White House kind of blends in. It doesn't stand out. It does from the ground, but not from the air. And so it's a little difficult to pick out just by the very nature of its construction. I mean, it's not like the Capitol building or the Pentagon, which are, unique shapes and objects. So in that sense, the White House was spared because of camouflage, essentially. But beyond all of that, again, we have to remember not only what happened, but also the heroes of that day who did what was in some cases complete, knowing that they were going to lose their life or had the possibility of losing their lives in the process. And the other heroes who, for them, it was just a normal, this is a job. This is the job that we do. The police and firefighters that go in there, their selfless service is what they give, and what they gave was their lives in doing that service-related job and career. So without any further conversation, I'm going to take a moment. Let's spend 1 minute listening to taps and remembering not only where we were that day, but the souls that were lost as a part of it. Okay. Now, I'm not going to do my usual, icon that pops up for this, but I want to move into reading from the American Patriots Almanac. And I usually do the On This Day in American History, but tonight I feel the somber occasion is such that I don't want to light that off. And all right. So this is for September 11th. On Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, 19 al-Qaeda terrorists, mostly from Saudi Arabia, hijacked 4 commercial jetliners and turned them into flying bombs. 2 of the hijacked planes slammed into the 110-story twin towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. Americans watched their TV screens in horror as the 2 skyscrapers, among the tallest in the world, collapsed. Another plane hit the Pentagon, and a 4th jet crashed in rural Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 people died in the attacks, including more than 400 firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical service workers who had rushed to the World Trade Center to help survivors before the buildings fell. Among the day's heroes were passengers on board United Flight 93, which had left Newark International Airport for San Francisco, but changed course toward Washington, D.C., after 4 terrorists seized control. Passengers who began making frantic calls on their cell phones learned that other airliners had been hijacked and crashed in suicide missions. Realizing their captors must be headed toward a high-profile target, a group of Flight 93 passengers resolved to stop them. Passenger Todd Beamer told an operator that he and a few others were going to jump the hijackers. "Are you ready?" the operator heard him say to someone. "Let's roll." Moments later, Flight 93 went down in rural southwestern Pennsylvania. All aboard were killed. The hijackers' target was probably the U.S. Capitol building or the White House. Congress and the president have designated September 11th as Patriot Day. The flag should be flown at half-staff, and Americans are asked to observe a moment of silence to honor the innocent victims who perished during the worst acts of terrorism ever carried out against the United States. I know my flag has been flying half-staff since the Queen died, just in reference or in respect, I should say, to the death of one of the longest-serving monarch. But it will stay at half-staff until Monday. In fact, tomorrow I might even take down, just because of the weather, I might take down the current flag that's up there and put my big 9 by 5 foot flag, ceremonial flag, up. You know, a couple of the songs that came out of 9/11, after 9/11, a couple moving songs came out. One in particular was by Alan Jackson, "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?" And it essentially talked about looking at, thinking about, and understanding the horrific things that happened that day, and also to remember to keep our perspective in terms of loving each other, and making sure that you say what you need to say. Oh, I just realized I didn't move my okay. Say what you need to say to the people, because you never know when things are going to go astray. The other one was by Toby Keith, which essentially expressed anger at the act and talking about how Americans go and kick butt when we get pissed off, which honestly, considering the fact that, World War I, World War II, and that kind of stuff, yeah, we do tend to react that way. And when we get motivated, we definitely can do a lot of damage. But I think that also leans toward because we sort of initiated a couple of different wars over in the Middle East with regards to the situation on 9/11. We also need to understand how horrible the drawback was that Biden, quote unquote, facilitated. It's not just the 13 service members that died in the process, but it's also just the fact of we went over there with a mission, and we had given essentially 20 years worth of peace, essentially, in the region. And pulling out like we did was not exactly what I think necessarily the people who had given their lives, especially those heroes who had given their lives, would have wanted. Now, I could be wrong on that completely. But to just leave them and leave it in a black hole like he did, I think doesn't do their memory any justice. So one thing that came out of 9/11, of course, was the extended scrutiny of things like people getting on planes. We had the creation of the Transportation Security Administration. We had metal detectors and millimeter wave machines that could, see through light clothing on the outside of the body. We had pat downs and things like that added. You had things like all kinds of new procedures and you can't take certain chemicals with you. You can't take things in your carry-on bigger than 3.5 ounces and those kinds of things. It's time to start taking a look at some of the things that have come from that and really examine them closer and understand that they may not be as effective as what we expected them to be. And this first article that I put in the show notes from the Political Insider brings to question whether or not handing over that safety, handing over those freedoms for safety is even effective anymore. I mean, I don't know if anybody's really heard or seen, but I'm sure, there's tons of articles that have been written about how the TSA doesn't pick up a lot of things that have gone through and been a problem for security agents. And I know personally that there are a couple places where it seems like there might be some security holes. Overall, I would say that the security measures put in place are probably effective to the point of being kind of like that ADT sign that you stick out in front of your house. It demonstrates that there's something there, but as to how effective that something truly is, that has called into question. But beyond that, even in today's day and age, with the weaponization of a lot of our current situation with the FBI and that kind of stuff, we also have things like this article that can kind of be a little scary, to be honest with you. So apparently the Department of Justice, according to a report, the Department of Justice used the 9/11 Patriot Act terrorism law in order to obtain search warrants on January 6th defendants. Now, one thing that I think a lot of people don't seem to understand is that the National Security Administration, the NSA, and the FISA court in particular, was put in place by the Patriot Act with the idea, well, maybe not the NSA, but the FISA court in particular was put in place by the Patriot Act for the specific use of looking at foreign entities and not American citizens, because American citizens are supposed to be protected by the Constitution, by the Fourth Amendment, by the Fifth Amendment. Fourth Amendment in particular against unreasonable searches and seizures, which is the claim that Donald Trump has against the FBI right now with the search of Mar-a-Lago. The problem is with any law or with any rule is the abuse of that law and that rule. And that is the challenge that we have today. In a post 9/11 world, yes, it seems prudent to add layers of security. But at what cost? And I believe Benjamin Franklin is quoted as saying, those who give up their liberties for a little bit of security deserve neither. And in this particular case, I think he was spot on. One challenge that we have with anything with regards to laws and things like that, it all depends on how they're enforced and whether or not they are enforced in a prudent manner. And that is the question that we have in a lot of these cases. Because 9/11 gave us a knee-jerk reaction, and it allowed government to actually reach into and further usurp some of our liberties. This is an example. Being able to use the Patriot Act terrorism law in order to obtain search warrants on, essentially, American people. And we've had on this show, I've talked about the January 6th defendants not having their day in court as of yet. For a lot of them, some of them have been have committed suicide in the jail cells that they've been in. But it's stuff like this that is essentially an overreach in government that it's an overreach of government, and it really should be taken away now. I mean, we can continue some of the things, but understanding that we have to dance a very fine line when it comes to things like this. We have another challenge, though. Not just do we have our own country, our own government overstepping its bounds in a legitimate attempt to keep horrific things like that from happening. But we also have an administration right now in particular who just completely ignores immigration laws and has our border wide open. And so even though we are using methodologies to try and keep our planes from being hijacked at the airports, there's also other places where we could be having people coming through our borders and presenting a risk to the American public. And it's a Fox News story, but this is an example of it. The number of illegal immigrants who have entered the U.S. since Biden took office is approaching 2 million. It's approaching 2 million in a matter of 2 years. That's a lot of people. And most of these people are, believe it or not, they are not Mexican nationals. They are from other countries like Cuba, like Nicaragua, Guatemala, There's even been other, you've seen reports of people getting picked up who are actually on, terrorist watch lists and things like that. We have a wide open border, and Biden, unfortunately, by having the Biden administration, I should say, by having that kind of policy, is actually putting us at risk again for another terrorist attack. And so sitting here looking, or even just any kind of attack, really, but even just looking at the fact that our southern border and our lax immigration policies are allowing these people to come in. What's worse is that we're not even tracking them. We're not even paying attention to them. They're just being shipped throughout the country without any tracking or any type of accountability as to where these people are going at all. And this is unfortunate because it's stuff like this that can present problems for us down the road. And one article that came out here just recently, coming from the Department of Homeland Security in particular, is in specific regard to the Afghanis that were brought here for out of the Afghan departure. I don't know if anybody remembers, but there were images of, these big giant cargo planes that were just filled with Afghanistan people, from there. I think they're called Afghanis. And they didn't even, some of them had green cards, some of them didn't. We may have known them, we may not have. And here's a report that came out, a DHS oversight report that said Biden's resettled a bunch of not fully vetted Afghans in the U.S. who may pose risk to Americans. Now, you would think that a country that was so interested with the Patriot Act to try and protect its people would be cautious about doing something like this, be cautious with our border. But they're not. And this is the actual report, by the way. And this right here, this is what they found. I'm going to read a quote out of this. After meeting with more than 130 individuals from the Department of Homeland Security, we determined DHS encountered obstacles to screen, vet, and inspect all Afghan evacuees as a part of Operation Allies Refuge, Operation Allies Welcome. Specifically, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, did not always have critical data to properly screen, vet, or inspect the evacuees. We've determined that some information used to vet evacuees through U.S. government databases such as name, date of birth, identification number, and travel document data was inaccurate, incomplete, or missing. We also determined CBP admitted or paroled evacuees who were not fully vetted into the United States. Now, they blame this on, and I'm quoting again, a list of Afghan evacuees who were unable to provide sufficient identification documents, a contingency plan to support similar emergency situations, and standardized policies. So those were the challenges that the DHS claims to have had. As a result, DHS may have admitted or paroled individuals into the United States who pose a risk to national security and the safety of local communities. This is a problem. This is a huge, huge problem. It's a huge hole in our national security. And given the fact that tomorrow is the anniversary of the worst terrorist attack on the United States soil, and this administration is not doing what it should be doing which is protecting us from foreign invasion. This is just absolutely ridiculous and absolutely sickening. And why these people cannot be considered derelict in their duty and derelict in their oath of office is completely beyond me. This is rough and horrific to even think about, especially in today's day and age when we're dealing with the potential. Because for those who may not remember the details of 9/11, these people came here and trained to learn how to fly the planes, not land, which would have been a red flag for anybody, I think, and should have been a red flag. But to not have alarm bells go off was some of the most simplistic red flag issues that should have made questions. And then to turn around 21 years later and have a completely open border, have, the DHS talking about how the Afghan refugees coming over here, they didn't even have a chance to vet them properly. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm actually kind of surprised that we haven't had another attack here on our soil as of yet. It doesn't go beyond me, though, to think that we probably have some in the works, planning. Wouldn't surprise me any at all. Not in the least bit. And unfortunately, these people in our government administration are opening us up in a security risk for all of this. I mean, it's bad enough that we have people coming across the border. We've got unvetted, illegals in the country that are being bussed all over the place. But it doesn't take much for someone who is not paying attention to details to miss someone who has a nefarious purpose. I mean, anyone who is trained to do something that bad to our country will have the training to be able to blend in and, escape notice in crowds and things like that. We have a serious security problem with this entire situation, and coming up on the anniversary of 9/11 just highlights it even more. It highlights it even more. And this is, I mean, just the audacity. I'm sorry, on the eve of this most somber day, to have the audacity to be talking about how, the border is closed, the border's protected, to even think about the idea that nobody can just, I mean, Karine Jean-Pierre, nobody can just walk across the border when you have video of people doing just that, of, Cubans in particular who identified themselves as Cubans in particular walking across the border and doing exactly that. And this is just horrible. I can't even imagine how these people cannot have at least not feel some responsibility, considering the magnanimous task that they have to protect this nation. That's the number one thing that federal government is supposed to do, is to protect the states from foreign invaders. They have a lack of, I guess, well, I mean, as Dan Bongino always says, it's not hypocrisy, it's not embarrassment, it's hierarchy. They think that they know better than us, and so they want to tell us what they are doing. But Have you ever seen a group of people who are more out of touch with what's happening in the world today? Who are more out of touch with what kinds of risks these policies that they have can present? I mean, I do some security aspects within my normal job. And, one of the things that is always brought up is the fact that, it's not the security holes that you know about and patch. It's the ones that you don't know. But if you don't at least try to block up the holes that you know about, then you're just opening yourself up to anything. I mean, if you just don't even bother to try, to even try to block the border, to even try to block these people coming across the border and vetting them. I mean, they're not even doing that. We've seen all the videos. They're just like taking them from the border. They're loading them up in buses and they're shipping them into the United States. That's the policy. They're not fingerprinting them. They're not holding them. They're handing them a cell phone and saying, here's your court date. And you can go and hang out in the United States until then. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's just absolutely ridiculous. They are completely, it is almost criminal in terms of what they are doing with this. All right. So enough about the border. Moving on to a couple of other topics. I don't know if anybody noticed this. This came out today, actually. Well, let me take another sip here. Hold on. Oh, and just so everybody knows, tonight I am drinking my Redbreast 12. Again, only I am drinking it neat out of my Stellar America shot glass. You've already seen the shot glass twice, but I wanted to let you know what was in it. So I don't know if we've had a lot of conversations about the integrity of the institutions that we have in our government. And one of the institutions, of course, is the FBI. The FBI has taken a lot of hits here recently. But we also have the Supreme Court because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision. There's been, a couple of other questionable decisions that have come about. They have upheld like the Second Amendment in New York and a couple of those. And so it's kind of interesting to see Justice John Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, who arguably has been one of the potentially worst Chief Justices of the Supreme Court in history. A lot of his decisions that he has written especially in recent times, have been, rather than being broad-based, have been very narrow and very focused. And, one of the challenges, I think, that the Supreme Court has, of course, is the fact that for the last 40 or 50 years, it has been ruled by several activists. And it's taken on an activist tone. It hasn't really done what normal, average, everyday Americans who read the Constitution truly understand what it's supposed to be able to do. Well, he came out apparently today and said essentially that he is defending the Supreme Court's legitimacy and says the last year has been difficult in many respects. Well, if I had him in front of me, or if he happened to listen to this broadcast, I'd like for him to understand something. Number one is that the Supreme Court of the United States is to decide simply, very, very simply, whether or not the law that is in front of him and being presented and argued, is it constitutional or is it not? Meaning, does it apply? Does the Constitution apply to that law, or does it not? And I think the challenge that we have with the whole idea of the Supreme Court's legitimacy has literally come down to things like the Dobbs decision, which we've talked about on this program, several times before. There are several things that this federal government does that are not in the Constitution, that are not a part of the Constitution. And I'm a big advocate for the for the 10th Amendment. I am a big advocate for the Second Amendment. That was a little bit of a slip. But I am a big advocate for the Second Amendment. I'm an advocate for all of the amendments. I'm also an advocate for the original text of the Constitution. But the question becomes whether or not the law that's in front is constitutional or not. Does it follow the Constitution? And the sad part about it is that we've gotten away from the understanding and the idea that the Constitution itself and many of the actions of the federal government are actually unconstitutional. My favorite amendment, and actually there's two of them, but my favorite one is the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment simply states that if it is not part of the Constitution, nor specifically prohibited by the Constitution to be a federal purpose, then everything else that doesn't fit in those two categories goes to the states, literally. Now, the 9th Amendment kind of says something similar, but it doesn't say it quite as clearly as the 10th Amendment. And honestly, I think in terms of things like Dobbs, as an example, abortion is not part of the Constitution, never has been. And until there is a constitutional amendment, it never will be. And things like marriage are not in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that talks about the federal government being able to regulate marriage. In fact, there is the whole idea that, the left loves to tout with the idea of the separation of church and state and they use it in the mindset of that the state needs to be separated from the church, meaning that the church can't enforce its philosophies, thoughts, laws, morality, whatever, into the state. But that actually also goes the other direction. And so you have things like this new Defense of Marriage, or the Defense of Marriage Act that happened. And then you also have this new same-sex marriage proposal that's potentially going to be voted on in the Senate here in the next day or two with regards to protecting same-sex marriage and codifying it. I actually challenge that on the idea that the 10th Amendment applies. That the 10th Amendment basically, again, states that if it's not specifically written in the Constitution as a federal government purview, or specifically states within it that the federal government is the only one that has it and the states don't have the right to infringe upon it, that it automatically reverts to the states or to the people. And that's literally what it means. So I challenge anyone who can go through the Constitution and explain to me how the Constitution itself states anything regarding those key issues. And realistically, government shouldn't even be a part of either one of those issues. In my opinion, abortion is a medical procedure. It is a decision to be made between a individual and their doctor. The morality of it is very clear, but at the same time, you need to understand that not everybody follows the same moral code. So, other than the protection of life, which is an arguable point, you really don't have anything in the Constitution that talks about how abortion is a part of the conversation for the federal government to be involved in. and that deals with the 10th Amendment. But John Roberts trying to say that he wants to, defend the court's legitimacy. Sir, defend the legitimacy by doing your damn job, by applying the Constitution in its entirety against the laws that are being brought to you, the courts, the court dockets that are being brought to you. I know of one particular court case that's coming up here that has an Oregon baker who refused to bake a cake on the grounds of religious freedom. That's going to be heard in this next session. So all I can tell you, sir, Mr. Chief Justice John Roberts, is do your damn job. Rein in the executive and legislative branches of government when they overstep their constitutional authority, which Joe Biden has done with the executive orders throughout his entire administration. The legislative branch does it all the time. And that's all that I'm saying is rule on the constitutionality. Whether you agree with it or not doesn't make a difference. Rule on the Constitution and what the Constitution says. Your best advocate in that space is Clarence Thomas. He is the most constitutional judge that we have sitting on that bench as of today. Follow his lead. That's what I have to say about that. Now, in other news, we have a challenge, as if we didn't have many other challenges because of our illustrious leader. But we have another challenge. I don't know if anybody saw this little gem, but as if you've been watching the program, I've been kind of warning about this. We've been talking about, there's been Ukraine, there's been, all kinds of talk about China overtaking Taiwan. But I've also pointed out there's a couple other places that we need to focus on in terms of geopolitical politics or geopolitical nature and the politics in the world, is that you have Iran getting closer and closer to having nuclear capability. But you also have a little country with a guy in charge who has just made it illegal to denuclearize their country. So they've passed a law that essentially says that they will not, in any circumstances, back off of their nuclear program. And that same law also sets up automatic nuclear attack if any of their leaders are harmed. Folks, this is a problem. This is a huge problem, and it's going to continue to be a huge problem as long as we have a leader with a weak constitution. He is, for every little flub that he does that we call him out on, it is magnified tenfold elsewhere around the world. Because we may call him out on a few things, but they are watching every single little thing. I don't understand how people cannot see that even if his son, let's just go on the assumption that his son is completely cleared of all charges with regards to money laundering from other foreign nations. Okay. Let's just say that every single one of his interactions were innocent. That doesn't matter to foreign powers. They see it as a weakness and a possibility to be exploited. This situation is further exacerbated by all of the stories that we have with regards to the Hunter Biden laptop, Joe Biden's potential participation in getting money from pay to play. The whole Ukraine situation. And they are going after the one leader in the modern era who has not had a single world aggressive posture occur to him. And they keep going after the man. It has nothing to do with his personality or his problems. Believe me, I've been saying this over and over. I don't like Trump personally. I think he's got a lot of skeletons in his closet. He's got a lot of character flaws. But the fact of the matter is his methodology and his thought process and his plans for governing are perfect for the position that we're in today. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, however you want to take it, we have a very weak and exploited leader in the White House right now. He is vulnerable. Whether it's his age, his mental faculties, or all of the scandals that he is involved in, he is vulnerable. And in the world stage, that means we are vulnerable as a country. And all of the things that he is doing toward our military, toward our internal strife, all of the things that he's doing, it is being watched very carefully by these people. And they all know that he is not up to the task of protecting us against enemies of a foreign nature. Now, what's even worse, though, is that if you've been a part of being a part of this broadcast, this show, if you ever listen and listen to my past episodes, especially when I've talked about the World War II. World War II had a very unique stance in the fact that America itself was in sort of an isolationist mode. We didn't want to get involved in another European war. We had just finished one with World War I. Not that much far back in our memories, because it was, 1918, and World War II kind of kicked off in the mid to late 30s with Nazi Germany taking over Austria. But we essentially were kind of in an isolationist mode. And one of the things that Japan did, why they did it, I have no idea. But one of the things that Japan did, and history books will tell you, is they woke the sleeping giant when they attacked us at Pearl Harbor. And one of the reasons one of the admirals for Japan was against the idea of attacking the United States mainland was reportedly the idea that there would be a gun behind every bush. So one of the things that is true throughout history has always been the theory or the idea of the power of deterrence. And one of the main reasons for the power of deterrence is always either that you're not strong enough to take over your enemy, or your enemy has superior firepower and you know it, or there is a mysteriousness about the enemy and you literally don't know what can happen. And so it's those kinds of things that make people who are usually on the bad side of the house, who want to wish ill on you or do ill to you, that will cause them to have a bit of a question in their mind. And that's the power of deterrence. Well, one of the things that we have in our very, very well known in our internal politics is the fact that civilians own weapons. Doesn't matter really what kind of weapons, just the fact that we have weapons, that we can own guns. Well, what Joe Biden and the liberal left don't understand is that actually has the advantage of the power of deterrency. Statistically speaking, the number of people who apply for hunting licenses up in the state of Wisconsin, just the state of Wisconsin alone, can rival some of the world's armies. Now, just imagine if you extrapolate that across all 50 states. That's a huge unofficial army that we have here in America by individuals who own weapons. And that, just by having that simple fact being relayed to the rest of the world, is enough to cause pause for a lot of people, because they know that just about every single person in America is armed. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of times where I've traveled throughout the world and there have been misconceptions about the American people, that we walk around with guns openly attached to our hips. And in some cases that does occur. But just the mere fact that people think that can be enough of a deterrent to keep someone from actually doing something here in the United States. Now, this is a bit scary because, as we know, the liberal left has been trying to get a gun registry going. This gave me pause. This is from yesterday. And this gave me pause. The Credit Card Industry Group has approved a plan to track sales of guns and, what's worse, ammo with a new merchant code. So now if you purchase guns and ammo with a credit card, it's no longer a discrete transaction. It will be specifically able to be tracked with this new merchant code. Now, I didn't actually go through and kind of see all of the individual details, but this is a bit disconcerting if you are a gun owner, because of the fact now you can essentially have a trackable setup to go after these kinds of things. And if you think the idea of, using cash obviously is a good thing, as Buddy points out right here, always use cash. But what happens if we move from a cash-based to a cashless society? This is a danger, not only from the credit card companies, but also from the idea of going to an all-digital currency, because this is exactly what they can do with all digital currency. So this becomes a bit of a problem. This honestly should be challenged in court, and I'd be interested to see what happens here, because this essentially becomes a de facto registry when it comes to things like tracking guns and ammo purchases through digital means. So this is a bit of a problem here. I have one more article to go over here, so just bear with me for a second. But as we start moving towards the midterm elections, we need to start remembering that that we need to ensure that if you cannot vote for the guy that you want, meaning the America First candidate, at least vote Republican. There's no way to vote, in my mind, there's no way to vote Democrat. Everybody in the Democrat Party right now has sold their soul to the devil and are doing things that are unconstitutional, that shouldn't be done. They are supporting things that shouldn't happen. So, as far as I can encourage you to make sure that you vote, no matter what happens, make sure that you vote. Check your voter registration, Buddy says. He just popped this up, and I only caught it out of the corner of my eye, but you're right. Check your voter registration. Make sure you're registered correctly. Make sure you're not registered more than once. Make sure that you're registered for the appropriate party. And then understand, too, that because we're coming around to the midterms, our social media, especially if you are a conservative like myself, our social media is going to start getting hammered even more. This little article came out, 2 days ago, I think? Wait a second. Yesterday. So this came out, and it's specific to Twitter, which is kind of interesting, but I'm sure all of the Facebook and everything else, all of those are all going to be doing this. But Twitter beefs up tweet policing ahead of the midterms amid debunking of secure 2020 election narrative. Despite the platform's insistence on irreproachable security, fairness of 2020 election, evidence of irregularities and inequities is abundant and mounting. Now, you're right. Evidence is of irregularities and inequities is abundant. They are correct in that. And they are, for the most part, they are true. But apparently what's happening is Twitter announced the expansion of Birdwatch, which is a fact-checking program. And again, fact checkers are actually just narrative checkers. Facebook has already said they're opinion checkers in court. They're not actual fact checkers. And the social media platform began testing it last year that has contributors flag misleading tweets with notes that provide informative context, which is to say that they change it based off of their narrative. I mean, I've already been kicked off of kicked off of YouTube last week, either that or week before last, because of a supposedly election misinformation. So I already know YouTube is in the middle of this. But if anybody even comes out and starts talking about irregularities, we as conservatives potentially will get kicked off the platforms. So keep this in mind. It's going to get worse before it gets better. They are going to come after conservatives, not like this is any kind of a surprise, but they're going to come after us even worse at the closer that we get to the midterms. So all of this stuff is, I mean, it's just amazing. It is just absolutely amazing. So just to kind of wrap things up for tonight, do me a favor. Tomorrow, if you have a flag, make sure that your flag is flying at half staff, especially for tomorrow. Take a moment to reflect on not only where you were, but also the souls that had been lost. Take a moment to reflect on how precious life actually is, and also make sure that you recall and remember and remind others of the precariousness that we are in due to this administration. And make sure that you vote in November to correct, hopefully correct that problem. All right. It's time for Questions for Whiskey. And tonight's actually a little bit of an apropos kind of question. I haven't seen him on yet. I know that he has difficulties getting in on Saturday nights just because of his personal stuff. So he will probably see this tomorrow or Monday. But Jay Monty sent me this message. And it reads, "Hey, Whiskey, I don't know about you, but for me, I feel that people thanking me for my service isn't needed. While I appreciate the sentiment, I also feel that it was an honor that doesn't require any thanks. What are your feelings on this? Do you like it, or do you think it is something that isn't needed? Curious to see if I am the only one." All right, so Jay Monty, I'm going to be honest with you. First of all, yes, as a veteran, it does feel a little weird when you're thanked for your service, especially someone like me who didn't serve necessarily in a combat zone, nor did any of the absolute amazing feats that many combat veterans actually did. The loss of, a leg, an arm, and even just the mental anguish that comes from it, it does feel funny. However, that being said, I do understand the sentiments behind it. And so sometimes, depending upon the situation, I might just say, okay, look, I appreciate that, but I am not one of the heroes that you're thinking of. Even though realistically, you did at one point sign a blank check to the government that said payable up to and including your life. And everybody did that. Everybody who served did that exact thing. Now, whether or not that check was cashed depended a lot upon where you were at and what you were doing. And yes, it does seem a little funny. And for me, again, it feels a little funny. But considering when you look back on like Vietnam veterans, when they came back, when they got sucked over there because of the draft, and then they came back and they got spit on and called child killers and all kinds of nasty names and everything else, the situation could be worse. So I guess the best thing in a case like this is to essentially say, you're welcome, and just move on. You can make a big case out of it if you wish. And I have kind of said, look, I appreciate what you're doing. Just save it for someone who actually has done stuff. But at the same time, just remember and keep in the back of your mind that even if you didn't do stuff that you think would warrant the thank you, you still signed that paperwork. You still gave a portion of your life in service to the country. You weren't called upon to necessarily do everything at times, but at the same time, you still did it. You still signed on the dotted line. And especially today, I think that we're going to end up having to call on some of our veterans here in the near future, unfortunately, for whatever reason. So all I can really say is, while I feel uncomfortable getting that kind of thanks, I think the best course of action is just to say, well, thank you for recognizing it. You're welcome, and just move on. Yeah. So the gentleman who submitted that question, I've just been told right here that he has 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. And see, it's that kind of an individual. And I'm that kind of an individual who really does deserve thanks, deserves our thanks for putting their life on the line with the Purple Hearts and the Silver Stars, or the Silver Star. So honestly, I know you feel funny about doing it, but understand it's also more for the person giving you the thanks than it is necessarily for you in accepting it. And I guess that is my final Whiskey Musings thought of the evening. Do me a favor, if you like the program, if this is your first time here watching and listening, run on over to Rumble, my preferred outlet, and sign up for an account and subscribe. If you absolutely have to, go ahead and subscribe on YouTube. But Rumble is the free speech alternative to YouTube and will not cancel me for something that I say. Other than that, go and check out the rest of my episodes and podcasts. And if you have a question for whiskey or a pet of the week submission, submit that to fans, that's Foxtrot Alpha November Sierra, at whiskeymusings.online. That's fans at whiskeymusings.online. Or you can even just drop me a line. I mean, it doesn't have to be like a pet of the week or a question submission. You could just drop me a line for that. Otherwise, I will see you next time, which will be Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, right here for the Whiskey Musings broadcast. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.